You're listening to episode 4 of the Happy Space podcast. Today we're exploring why intuition is key for HSPs with intuition expert Sunil Godse. Welcome to the Happy Space podcast, a place where highly sensitive people thrive. Not only will we learn how to better navigate life with our superpowers, we'll find ways to better manage the challenges too. We'll hear from product and service innovators, space designers, and leaders who believe in creating an inclusive, neurologically safe world. If you're highly sensitive or want to better understand and support someone who is, then you are in the right place. I'm your host, Clare Kumar, and I'm so very happy you're here. So it's a great pleasure of mine to really highlight HSPs in the world who have figured out ways to be successful integrating their trait into their lives. And I'm really thrilled today to be diving into a topic which I think is very important for HSPs. It's the topic of intuition. And I'm speaking to Sunil Godse, who's an intuition expert. He's written a book called Gut. It's titled "What Is It? How to Trust It and How to Use It." And Sunil works now as an intuitive branding expert. He has significant experience in business, growing multi-million-dollar businesses cumulatively over several years, and now helps other entrepreneurs and business owners leverage their intuition. And I thought, as an HSP, we have incredible powers of noticing. But sometimes in an effort to fit in and belong, we suppress some of these superpowers or even ignore them. I know for years, I really did not pay attention to some of the signals that were coming to me to give me a feeling, an inkling that something was off. I just let my head overtake my heart and my gut, and the whole body, mind, spirit was not aligned in some of the decisions that I made. So I thought, boy, it would be great to learn from Sunil about what he's learned through studying intuition. And that's the conversation I'm inviting you to join in today. Today's episode of the Happy Space podcast is sponsored by clarekumar.com. Not only am I excited to spearhead the Happy Space movement, I love coaching busy professionals to achieve greater productivity and well-being. The two go hand in hand. I also adore taking the stage. If you're looking for an interactive, engaging event to inspire and invite action, whether it be on successful work-life integration, sustainable performance, organization and productivity, or expanding inclusivity, please visit clarekumar.com and find out more. Oh, and if you haven't already joined the Happy Space Pod, it's our complimentary online community. You'll find it right at clarekumar.com/happyspace. So Sunil, I'm so thrilled that you're joining me. I know you recently discovered that you are a highly sensitive person. And I wonder that upon reflecting and learning about the trait, if you can share a little bit about what it means to you and how you think it's affected your life.
Yeah, it's really interesting having that conversation with you about HSP and reflecting back on obviously there's some pattern matching that I like to do in the past, and so I used to always wonder, when I used to get into situations, even when I was younger, I used to really soak in a scene. And it was really something that sometimes I would catch myself staring at someone or the background, or why is someone acting like that? Or even in movies, when I watch movies, people will be looking at the main character, but I'll find myself looking at the others in the scene. And it was, now that we almost have a bit of a label on it, which is really sensitive, it was really important for me to soak in everything in that scene. And it was really important to watch how people reacted when I said something or when something was said to them. And I found it really fascinating in a very quiet way because it's something that I really don't share with a lot of people. And
Mhm.
this is probably the first, I think it is the first time that I'm actually being vocal about it, because nobody's really kind of, it's not a normal conversation that you generally have with people. And in some cases, I used to think, am I weird? By and I would think that maybe people that are high in HSP maybe ask that same question, like, why do I seem to focus like that, and others don't, if we're looking to compare? So,
Well, you know, you remind me of Brene Brown. Recently, I listened to a podcast where she's talking to her sisters about her latest book, Atlas of the Heart. And she reports being, as a child, highly vigilant. Now, I think
mm,
that she grew up in a house where they didn't feel particularly comfortable all the time, and so she was noticing, and she was paying particular attention to people's emotions. And it sounds like there is a parallel noticing, and so I suspect she's a highly sensitive person too. I'm playing spot the HSP all the time
right.
now, and so yeah, when we spoke, I thought, I bet, I wonder, and so we explored it, and turns out you are.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so you noticed as a child, and this is interesting because Dr. Aaron in her assessment, and I think other assessments I've seen about the traits say, answer this as if you were a child. Because
Mm,
we've evolved a little bit and maybe we've turned off or suppressed some parts of ourselves in order to not show up weird. And,
mhm.
but that innate sense of curiosity and what we tune into is, I think it's a really profound cue. And you're right, we don't talk about this stuff. This is just the stuff of life that happens. But when we give
Mhm.
it attention, it's really interesting to see. So now, as an adult, as a professional speaker, as a business consultant, um, how does it play in your work now?
So it's really important for me because what I deal with when it comes to reactions is very, very important, right? And seeing the scene is really important, and especially when you're looking for clues that
Mm.
can't be faked or can't be masked. And oftentimes, that's where the gold is in finding a solution to a problem or finding what the problem is, because it's almost like theater when you're dealing with a client sometimes, where there's a lot of people running around with masks, but you almost have to kind of look behind the masks or under or what have you to find out what's the real problem going on. And once you can sort of pierce through that, and I think highly sensitive people are better able to do that because of that heightened sense.
Mhm.
You're trying to investigate something, at least from my opinion. And
Mhm.
so when I have those sort of micro senses heightened, then oftentimes I'll find inconsistencies and then start to question why. And then those questions have to be answered. And if they can't, we have a problem. And that
Yeah.
problem leads to a bigger problem. And it's the bigger problem they're dealing with. And then what I have to do is sort of peel back the layers to get to the root of the problem.
Yeah.
Um, and then that's the suggestion I have to the client.
That's amazing. I have a feeling that the fact that highly sensitive people have more mirror neurons is also part of your success in building rapport and making people feel like they can trust you and open up too. Do you think that has a part to play in your relationships?
Oh, big time. Yeah. Because the mirror neurons, obviously are the ones that are, obviously they call them mirror neurons because you're sort of mimicking who's in front of you. And as HSPs, we're reinforcing that. And when we reinforce that, that's sort of a trigger to the neurons to kind of, go forth and multiply, so to speak.
Mhm.
And then from a neuroscience perspective, that's exactly what happens. It's just like, if you look at when we get hit with a fearful experience or a shocking experience, the unconventional wisdom would say that that's the best time to change. And so if you look at from a neuroscience perspective or neuroplasticity perspective, that is the best time, because what's happened is you shock the neurons into finding new pathways, and they're ripe to find the new pathways. What you have to do is give them the new pathways. And unfortunately, we
Huh.
fall back into our own habits, and the neurons start to solidify those old pathways again.
So
So
we miss an opportunity
miss a
if,
huge
right?
opportunity.
So stress is an opportunity is what you're saying, stress and challenge. I
Yeah.
mean, we've certainly had that in the past 2 years. We've had all kinds of stress and challenge. And I do notice that there have been some really incredibly good things that have come out of it. But to be someone who can respond in a way to grow in stress. Have you noticed anything that needs to be present? Is it mindset? Is it, what is it about the people that recognize that stress and are willing to, I call it dancing in discomfort, and grow? Have you noticed anything about that?
Yeah, and I think this is a bit of a challenge to some, but this is where we call it, if we could sort of dive into the intuitive aspect of things, where my expertise is. When you look at intuition from perspective, from the basics is it just sends you some signals, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're looking to, even in signs of stress or fear or what have you, if your intuition is kind of telling you to go in the right direction, it's paired with a positive signal. And so what you have to do is, in the smoke and the noise and the news, and where you're trying to figure out where your life needs to go, you really need to pay attention to those signals, because they're your guiding light through the fog.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes training. And it takes as HSPs, we're highly sensitive, which means we're highly sensitive to those signals.
Mm-hmm.
And if we take the time to figure out what are the positive signals and negative signals, then that should guide us through whatever path that we're trying to go down.
Yeah, absolutely. So now is a perfect time to tell our listeners about your expertise. So Sunil here, well, you would have heard in the intro, but he's here because he is an expert in intuition, and I've known in myself that dismissing my intuition has led to numerous blunders in my life. And I've had a renewed commitment to say, wow, I need to step into this noticing and pay attention to it. And so Sunil, in his book, Gut, What Is It? How to Trust It and How to Use It, talks a lot about this. So I urge you to have grab a copy of that if you want to deeply explore it. But I want to talk to you, yeah, to dive into this topic of signals, understanding sort of, can you give us an idea what signals are so that the highly sensitive person out there can say, oh yeah, I've got those. What are we talking about when you say signals?
Yeah, and the best thing that I can take people down is to look at a situation when you made a decision that you knew was the right decision, and you go down memory lane and say, what was one of the best decisions that you made,
Mm,
and then what did it feel like in that moment? And that feeling is one of your positive signals. And so we all have a set inventory of them.
mhm,
And so your job is to find out what is that set inventory by continuing down memory lane.
uh-huh,
And then the exact opposite is, what are the bad decisions that you made, and what did it feel like in that moment? And those negative signals, generally like irritations. And the thing with negative signals is that they actually start very subtle in nature. And so generally when you make the first bad decision, your intuition is giving you this little subtle signal saying, come on, Sunil.
mhm,
But then because we haven't done our homework on what those signals are, they're too subtle. We go
yeah,
to the next signal. The intuition says, okay, you're going to ignore me here. I'm going to send you something a little bit louder, or
mm,
something that changes. And so ultimately you get to a point where you say, this is really uncomfortable.
mm,
I'm going to start backing away. And so what I'm trying to get people to do is to really take stock of their inventory of signals. And then if they go through my book, there's sort of the 4 types of intuition that are there, instead of just labeling as just intuition as sort of one big construct. And we're naturally stronger in one of the 4 types. And so what I do is that I make sure that the other 3 are stronger through either my coursework or my coaching. And if you don't strengthen the other 3, what happens is then you miss their signals,
okay,
because
so
there's
I love all the nuance in this and the deep thought that you've clearly put into it. I want to stay with signals just a little bit
sure.
longer, and then we're definitely going to dive into the 4 types of
Yeah.
intuition, because I know I was immensely curious and I'm like, what do you mean 4 types? But
Yeah.
staying with the signals, can you give
Yep.
us, just paint us a little bit of a picture more of some of those positive feelings, like in the body, like what kinds of positive signals are there that are good? Like what should we be noticing and labeling
Yeah.
as a signal?
Absolutely. So some are going to be pretty common. So these are going to be, sort of that feeling of flow, the dots connecting,
Mhm.
a gentle pulling, or just absolutely knowing that this is the right decision to make. But then there are some unique ones. Like, for example, there's one CEO that I interviewed, and he sees this omen that comes up on his behind his right shoulder. And so it just sits there. There's no color,
Uh-huh.
there's no shape. It just comes up. And so whatever he's doing in business,
Yeah.
when that omen pops up, he's immediately says yes to everything that he's doing. And he's now run 2 multi-million-dollar businesses because an omen pops up on his right shoulder. And he's never told anybody except me, because I was the one to figure out, how does his intuition really kind of speak to him?
An omen sounds kind of handy. I'd like to have a happy omen, but
Yeah.
this feeling of knowing. I said
Yeah.
actually, with respect to the podcast itself, I talked to the designer, and I'm showing for the video, for people who are not watching the video, I'm showing the podcast cover art, and I said to her, I said, okay, we're close with some earlier designs. I will know it when I see it.
Yeah.
It's because I knew when I named my company Stream Life. As soon as I came up with this word, I thought, that's it. I'll know it when I see it. But if I don't, I know, just keep working with me because we're going in the right direction. We'll know when we get there. And I can trust that feeling of knowing. I never thought of that as a signal until
Yeah.
now.
And what's really interesting, using your same example, is that
Mhm,
when I first saw that piece of cover art
mhm,
that came up on your Facebook,
mhm.
uh, it was pretty intriguing for me. And so my intuition was in a positive way saying, yeah, this is really neat. And so when we look at establishing trust, in intuition, trust is a two-way street. So your intuition is saying this is really good. My intuition is saying this is really good. And now you have the ability to connect with people at an intuitive level that really gets the relationship to go deep.
Okay, so I just had goosebumps when you said that. What the heck signal is goosebumps? Because when I talk to someone on the regular now, when I hear something that resonates with me and is positive, I have full body goosebumps. What is that?
That is, it could be your first signal. It could be a confirmation signal. It
Mm.
could be a signal that you have a trusted relationship in front of you. So somebody particularly that you want to deal with in your inner circle, that's coming closer to your inner circle.
Double
And
goosebumps. Oh, stop.
yeah,
That's so weird.
and so these are now confirmations. And so what you're
Yeah.
hearing, what you're seeing, my facial expressions really resonates with who you are. And that's how you form really intimate relationships with good friends.
Oh my
Eh,
gosh. And what even is a goosebump? Like what it like I mean
so
it's like
that's that.
it's a shiver.
Yeah.
It's like a
So
shiver through the back of my body. It's
exactly. And
weird.
so this is a unique intuitive signal for you. So just like that omen that popped up,
Mhm.
this is yours. And it could be particular to people, right? So
Yeah.
professional situations, you may not go, I don't know. So this is where you'd have to do some discovery process. And when do
It's
those
happening
goosebumps?
all the time on Zoom calls with people in coaching conversations when
Yeah,
something it's something profound, meaningful, and positive.
right.
And yeah, and it stops me every time. I'm like goosebumps. It's
Yeah, and it
yeah,
could be a sign of some really deep conversation that's
yeah,
meaningful, that's not superficial in nature. And so
yeah,
that's your intuitive signal coming through saying, hey, yeah, this is a great conversation. Let's take this forward or deeper or what have you.
yeah.
And then you just navigate that path based on that goosebump, which is an intuitive signal.
Yeah, the people listening can't see my face, my jaw dropping like numerous times in this conversation.
And so we're just working at this in real time, right? You just figure out what your positive intuitive signal
Yeah.
is. You just answer that for yourself.
I know, I right. Oh man. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. And so some of the negative ones then, because those are the ones that can really help keep us on a more positive course if we tune
yeah,
into those. And I know that, I was in a not a very loving relationship for many, many years. And for my chapter 2, I decided, hot damn girl, you deserve to be in a relationship like your mom and dad had, which was so special. And so I resolved that when I was dating, I was going to take any little red flag and write it in bold capital letters in my journal. And I sure did. I sure did. When I met my love on the second date, when I, I firmly believe food is to be shared, I came back in my journal and wrote, not sure he likes to share food in big, bold capital letters because I decided I was not going to dismiss even the smallest thing now. I was going to have to name it because I was afraid of dismissing something that maybe is not the end of the world, but I wasn't going to miss it. So,
yeah,
so
no, absolutely, absolutely. And you're right. So when it comes to your intuitive signals that are negative, they're
mhm,
going to be irritations or red flags. And so others are going to have different language around it.
Mhm.
And if from a scientific perspective, your intuition hits the amygdala and there's no capacity for language. So, goosebumps are things we feel.
Mhm.
I can be saying red flags, but when I say red flags, everybody can have their own version of red flags,
Mhm.
right? So some will see the more common ones are getting a gut feeling, getting rashes, the hairs in the back of the neck coming up earlier than most. So we're not looking at a scary event where they should be, but they're warning you that maybe
Mhm.
perhaps you don't go down that alley or don't approach these people. So these are some of the common ones. Some of the more unique ones. I've got a unique one where my very first signal is that I lose my peripheral vision and I get hyper focused and my eyebrows cross. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that something in front of me is
Mhm.
bad. It's just that what I'm thinking of making a decision and that decision is not correct. If I start losing my peripheral vision, I know I
Mhm.
have to take a step back and evaluate that. And I had another entrepreneur who actually, when I was interviewing him, he had no clue what his. I mean, you don't really go up to somebody in a coffee shop and say, "Hey, listen, what are your negative intuitive signals?" They say, "Well, I've got a psychologist you might want to talk with." If you're going to ask those kind
Right.
of
They're going to
questions,
say strangers coming up to me and asking weird
yeah,
questions.
yes,
That
I'm
there's
running.
a signal.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this guy had eventually, when he started talking to me about his negative experiences, he kept grabbing his left earlobe, and he just realized that every time he made a bad decision, his left earlobe pulsated with heat every single time, and that was his
Wow.
first negative intuitive signal. And so now,
Yeah.
as long as we learn that,
Yeah.
for him, every time he gets a hint of heat on his left earlobe,
Yeah.
there's a decision he's about to make that he has to back away and find more information about. And
Mhm.
same thing with me. If I lose my peripheral vision, that's my first signal to say, okay, what is it about this decision that I need more information
Mhm.
before I permanently back away from it?
So you need to back away, gather more, decide if you're going back in
Yes.
or not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Powerful. Thank you. Thank you so much because I think our noticing listeners out there are going to be resonating with this in their own different way. I love it if, through social media, reach out to me. Let us know what your signals are. What kind of language do you put to positive signals and negative signals? Do you have an omen? Do they have a name? Like how in touch with you are these cues are you? And as I think towards the upper limits of sensitivity in the empath community and that tuning into even more different energies, I have a feeling that that's the sort of the greatest tuning into intuition because those clues are deeply profound and in elements I don't even begin to understand actually.
Yeah, we are. If you're an empath or you're high on the HSP, that's actually a really good way to be,
Hmm.
because one of the things I talk about in my book is something called intuitive mediums, and what intuitive mediums are those environments that you put yourself in where you cut
Hmm.
out the noise
Hmm.
and just sort of let your those thoughts or those feelings or those intuitive signals soak through. And so,
Hmm.
as an HSP, we naturally do that. We naturally take, because we're highly sensitive, we're tuning out the noise to sense what's in the environment, which means we're better in sensing our intuitive signals than
Hmm.
other people, because the other people are so caught up in the noise, and they have to take more uh, lengths, go to greater lengths to kind of step outside themselves and to really listen to their intuition compared to HSPs like us.
Yeah, now if HSPs are managing things well, we naturally bring in this introspective time
Yes.
and quiet walks and stillness in our day. If
Mhm.
we're not, and if, to use the word you were using earlier, this masking that can go on, we might be denying ourselves that, which is what I think I did for so long was I was like, signal, what signal? Who needs a signal? I'm just going to operate from my brain. Thank you very much. And to dismiss the rest. But boy, the power in being able to be still, be quiet, and do that tuning in. Ah, huge. So let's move now from the signals, which I'm so appreciative of that deeper exploration into, to now look at the four different types of intuition. And I wonder if you can bring those to life for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the four different types, it's almost the way that I characterize intuition. It's like driving a car. So when you drive a car, you basically push the button or turn the keys, depending upon how old your car is, and then you listen to the engine. And as long as the engine is, kind of sounding okay, positive signals, then you just kind of drive. And you don't need to be mechanics to, open up the hood and figure out what's underneath that hood until somebody weird like me comes in and says, oh, listen, I want to open up the hood of this thing called intuition to figure out what's underneath.
Mhm.
And so when I looked at intuition and when I interviewed over close to about 1,000 people to
Wow.
figure out, and I looked at the scientific research, what I found out was that there were 4 types of intuition that actually work all in unison. And so when you have a decision, all 4 have to gather certain types of information for you to go ahead with it. And so we're naturally stronger in one of the 4, and we're weaker in the other 3. And so that's why we miss the signals that our intuition generally tells us. And the best way to describe these 4 is using a case study. And this is a case study of my friend John Rothschild, who, when I approached him, he said that intuition doesn't exist. Come on, like, this guy's an investment banker. Data, Excel spreadsheets ruled the world. And at the time when I asked him, this was one of my first interviews for when I was diving into intuition. And at that time, if you Googled intuition, it came from like, manifestation, voices from God, and things like that.
Mm.
And so someone who's an investment banker, he's just like, okay, I'm not sure what you want to talk about, Sunil, but come on down anyways. We'll have a chat and we'll grab a coffee. And
He was worried about you though, wasn't he? He was a
yes,
little worried. Yeah.
I think that's why he didn't ask me to his office. Let's go visit another boardroom somewhere else. And as I was driving down to see him, I was really worried to say, okay, this is going to be either a very short interview, or it's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So I had to take all the research that I did, and so I turn on the camera and I'm starting to interview him, and I'm telling him about the CEO that sees omens, and I'm actually telling him about the entrepreneur who gets his left earlobe warm, and he says, Sunil, I'd really like to shake those guys' hands because omens and stuff like that. He said, listen, every decision you make in life or in business is based on your experience and learning. And so now we're going to dive into the 4 types of intuition, because one of the 4 types is called experiential intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And you're born with intuition. And there's this research study that shows that infants as young as 2 months old have been shown to have intuitive tendencies. So if you look at the research in terms of the number of events that you have when you're younger, 5,000 to 6,000 events per day. And when you're older, 28,000 to 35,000 events per day. Every single piece
No
of
wonder
that
we're
event,
tired. No wonder we're tired.
we're really tired, super tired. But every piece of that learning or experience is a data point that goes into the subconscious area of your brain, like a library. And so if you look at your brain like an iceberg, 90% is below water. That's the subconscious area of your brain, and the 10% above is the conscious area. So by the time you make a decision today, you've got billions and billions and billions of past data points to tell you whether the decision you're making is the right one or not. And so if it's the right one, obviously it's going to send you a positive signal. If it's the wrong one, it's going to send you a negative signal. And in some cases, I was telling John that your intuition goes against the data. And he goes, well, that's kind of funny, Sunil, that you mentioned that. He said he had that this exact same thing happened to him. And so John was in the franchise business. And so putting in McDonald's or Dunkin' Donuts or, Burger King, what have you. And what his team would do is they would look at the location and rate it on a scale of 10, looking at demographics, development in the area, traffic patterns, things like that. And there was this place in Toronto in the Esplanade area, and it was a 5.5 out of 10. And, he and his partner went out there. And now we're going to talk about the second of the 2 called situational intuition, that looks at the situation that you're in and the business units that support that situation. And he just looks and says, I don't know. I think we should be okay if we put a location here. And so he goes against the data that his team puts in. And that ends up being the beer market, which is one of the best franchise locations in his whole portfolio, all because what he says now, it says perhaps it's intuition. He's not sure. So at least half an hour into our conversation, I've got John from saying it doesn't exist to perhaps it's intuition.
And let me just say that beer market is where I had some of the best dancing I've ever had in
Oh,
Toronto.
wow.
So yeah,
Awesome.
you talked about the podcast cover art feeling good for me and then feeling good for you. There you go, right? There's something about that place it was amazing. They have another location that just closed. It was always terrible. The layout was terrible. The location just never worked. So
Mm.
yeah, something about that place and the Esplanade. It was hot. Yeah.
Yeah, and it went contrary to at the time there were people that are just going to have anything just to to take a swig, and
Yeah.
he wanted to do beer pairings.
Yeah.
So anybody who thinks that they're sane in terms of business, saying, okay, you want to take a place where people just want to get drunk and teach them about beer pairings? Like,
Yeah.
are you insane? Yet he goes against that because his
Mhm.
situational intuition was telling him this
Mhm.
is the place to go.
Yeah.
And then at some point, his purpose changes. And so John no longer wants to be an investment banker.
Mhm.
He actually wants to run a business. And now we're going to get into the third of the four, called relational intuition. And
Mhm.
what relational intuition does is very much like you get goosebumps.
Yeah.
It sends you signals when the people that you encounter, there's a thick filter that lets in, where it only lets in people into your inner circle who you absolutely trust, who are going to be there for you through thick and thin,
Mhm.
which your intuition knows are really good people. They're not putting them on a mask. There's no bad intentions.
Mhm.
And in John's case, when he made the decision to say, I want to run a business, all the people who are filled with things like ego, money, fame, high-end restaurants,
Mhm.
making millions of dollars, all of them said, you're nuts. Only one person asked him why, and that was his wife.
Mhm.
And his wife simply asked, John, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to throw a $3 to $4 million career
Yeah.
to start a business from ground zero?
Yeah.
And he looked at me, and now I'm paraphrasing him on the video. He says, Sunil, sometimes you can have all the data in the world, but you have to trust your intuition. This just feels right. And that was his intuitive signal. It
Yeah.
just felt right. And so
Mhm.
now we're an hour in from someone who says it doesn't exist to now realizing it exists. And the fourth of the four is called creative
Well,
intuition.
before we go to
Yeah.
that one though, help
Yeah.
me understand the relational a little bit because everybody was saying no, but his wife was asking him a question. So help me understand relational intuition in the context of that story. What was it
Yeah. So in this
exactly?
case, nobody really wanted to find out why he wanted to do something that he wanted.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he wanted to, instead of being someone who kind of paid for a team, he actually wanted to
Mhm.
coach the team. And
Mm.
so everybody else was more concerned about him keeping the career, not really thinking about what's your purpose? What do you really want to do? Why are you driving to this decision? They all were more concerned about the extrinsic motivation, and
So it was the strength of the relationship with his wife and what she
yes,
was reflecting back to him was what's truly important to you, John.
and asking that,
Yeah.
right? And actually
Okay.
asking that rather than judging
Yeah.
his decision based on the lens of others, right? I mean, so if
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah.
judging someone based on your extrinsic motivators,
Mm.
then you're going to think that John is nuts. But if you're a
So,
true friend,
yeah.
you would actually say, okay, why are you doing this?
So this is talking about in terms of relational, it's then a meaningful
Yes,
a relationship that's very meaningful to you,
yes,
that's going to have higher value, helping reflect back to you the positivity or negativity of this decision potentially.
absolutely. And that filter is usually
Mm,
pretty thick. And so we've
mm,
all of us have met thousands of people, but
yeah.
if you can actually count on your hand how many people will actually be there for you. I've
Hmm.
got two,
Hmm.
and they come and go.
Hmm.
There's people who have been there for me when times were tough, but then when times were tough again, they weren't.
Hmm.
And intuitively, I knew that they were pulling away before that, anyways.
Yes. Yeah.
So we intuitively can sense the fact that people are, the line, the strength of that rope
Oh,
between us
oh, goosebumps again. Stop it.
is thinning, and that
Yeah.
rope is getting farther and farther away. What
Yes.
happens is we forget to cut that rope, and we hang on way too long. Even though our relational intuition is saying, let the rope go, let the rope go, or you're going to drown with them. Let the rope
Wow.
go. But we
Yes.
seem to
Yes.
want to keep hanging and hanging and hanging. And when we need those honest opinions,
Mm.
These are people at the end of their rope that they're having saying, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But they're not close to you asking, why do you want to do it?
Yeah.
They're judging through their lens.
It's not a heart caring centered place.
Not at all.
So I had goosebumps when you said that. So it's becoming more clear to me that goosebumps are around a profound resonance.
Yes.
Whether it's positive or negative, it's a profound resonance. I'm like, holy, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you going to lay some more on me? Or I'm going to
I've got one more, which is a creative intuition.
Creative intuition. Okay, let's go.
And that's the last four. That's last. And so creative intuition is the actual risk level that you tolerate when you make a decision. And so if you're eating a sandwich or turning left at the lights, your creative intuition is pretty low. But in John's case, not only did he trade away a $3 to $4 million career, he was given this tiny bankrupt little restaurant. And you would think his intuition says, no, here's a healthy company you can take over. You've got the cash, you can get loans, you can take over this nice, healthy cash flow, good balance sheet, strong revenues. Nope. Tiny bankrupt little restaurant. Yeah. And that restaurant was Eastside Mario's location number 1. And he walked into it, turned it around, and grew it to over 1,000 locations. Wow. Including things like the beer market. They had the Red Devil. They had a number of steak places in the US. So over 1,000 locations, $2 billion in revenues by the time he retired. And it all started because it felt right.
That's an amazing case study. You've really brought intuition to life through understanding signals in some depth, which I really appreciate. And clearly I lived the experience as well. And then bringing these 4 types to life. My hope is that the listeners, our HSP friends out there, are going to think about how this reflects and shows up in your life. And we'll take these tools, we'll pick up a copy of the book to understand it even more deeply, and use this power tool of noticing to really be a guide that you can trust in your life. You have such a force if you're able to tune into it.
Absolutely. And remember, as HSPs, we are much better at sensing those signals. And so we have a better chance at becoming an expert in this. And there's nothing wrong with it. And with those expert signals, sometimes comes some tough decisions that we have to make about the situations we put ourselves in, the types of decisions we make, the people in our lives. But if your intuition is guiding you to make those decisions, they are the right ones for you. And so they could be fearful. But remember, we were talking earlier, if that fear is paired with a positive intuitive signal, that just means that it's moving you in a direction where there are doors of opportunity, there are people that will support you. And it may seem lonely, but it's not really, because you still have 1 or 2 people that are the true supporters of you. So enjoy being an HSP, because you're already much better at listening to intuitive signals than others.
What a beautiful way to end this episode. Thanks, Sunil. Everybody out there, enjoy being an HSP. Thanks again, Sunil.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. You can find all of the Happy Space Podcast episodes over at happyspacepod.com. That is also where you'll find a link to our online community. Please leave a review over at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you tune in. And if you liked what you heard, please share. After all, doesn't everyone deserve a happy space?